Nick Saban had these comments on Lane Kiffin that he put in John Talty's book, The Price, that we're going to get into when John comes on. That son of a, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. I don't, my mother's not here. I'm going to fire you, Jimmy, for ever talking me into hiring that narcissistic bleep. We're going to welcome John Talty to the show right now, author of The Price of National College Football analyst for us here at CBS. John, listen, man, that is the quote that is circulated around social media since it got posted yesterday. Now, very rarely does Nick Saban allow people to come into his safe zone, but he allowed you in. Explain to us kind of what your book is about.
Yeah, I guess first off, I have to give like a PG-13 warning about this book. It does have a couple bad words in it that people said. But, I think the idea behind the book was trying to understand, what's happening within college football right now and how some of these important programs or coaches are reacting to and handling it. And by that, I mean NIL, transfer portal, conference realignment, all these different things that are really having such a huge impact on the sport, as you guys know. So, more than a year ago, we picked a couple coaches and programs to try to follow and document for the last year or so. Nick Saban in Alabama are one of them. We did Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. We did Smokes guy Mike Loxley in Maryland, Jed Fish in Arizona, and a couple other, players, coaches, and others along the way, and just try to show at all these different levels within college football, what's really happening? What are they really dealing with on a daily basis? And why is this such a, kind of stressful and chaotic time for so many people within college football?
Now, John, you talk about the stressful and chaotic times in college football. And we know that Nick retired because some of that stressful and chaotic time. Can you touch on a little bit of what his last days were like and why he left the game and ended up retiring?
Yeah, I think one of the things I always thought was one of Nick Saban's greatest strengths was his ability to adapt and evolve. And there are all these different things along the way. One of the most prominent, I think, was the spread, hurry up, no huddle offense, something that he really didn't like, but eventually got his arms around. He was great at adapting with the COVID-19 pandemic and guiding his team to a national championship. I think the one area that he struggled a little bit in was NIL-related stuff. I think it went against a lot of his, core beliefs of how to build a successful team culture. And, over the last 3 years since we've had NIL, I think he evolved to an extent. I think he was a little more willing as time went on to do different things, but I don't think he was ever going to be 100% comfortable with it. And so I think the combination of NIL, the transfer portal, and also his, I think, challenge to get the right people around him on his staff. I think he realized it was getting harder and harder to get people who could do what he wanted to do on his staff. And I think those combination of factors ultimately played a pretty big role in his decision to retire in January.
John, is Lane Kiffin misunderstood?
Yeah, I think he is. And I think the biggest reason why I would say that he is because I think you see what he does on social media, which he's, very funny, but, he's trolling, he's, poking the bear. He has all these different things that I think people think, wow, he must be this huge personality and so, outside the box, all these different things. But when you meet Lane in real life, he's a lot quieter. I think he's actually very introverted in many ways. I think, I know people who have known him for a long time. They've told me stories of, him at times struggling with some social anxiety and having to, go into these big booster meetings. And it's not something he's necessarily comfortable with. And so I just think there's a side of Lane that's a lot different than maybe what the public sees. Or again, maybe they see a funny tweet and they think he's just this, comic all day. And it's a lot different in real life in terms of what his, coaching style is like and even just his personality if he was hanging out with you guys on set right now.
John, you touched on it briefly, and you said one of Nick's troubles was hiring the right people. Now, Lane was one of the good guys in terms of getting Nick past that hurry-up offense and getting him evolved into the modern-day football. But can you touch on a little bit more about why Nick felt like he couldn't get the right people in the building to keep the Alabama train moving?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. I mean, you look back to his last year, he had both an offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator opening. Bill O'Brien was leaving to go to the NFL, and then Pete Golding left for Ole Miss to join Lane Kiffin. And, as he went through that process, it's always, you guys know, it can always be a little bit depending on who's telling the story about whether somebody got turned down or whether he was offered at all. But there are multiple prominent candidates for both of those jobs that ultimately decided to either not take the job or pull out of the running consideration for it. Offensive coordinator in particular went through a lot of different candidates before ultimately hiring Tommy Rees away from Notre Dame. And I just think he realized there are two things. One, it was getting harder and harder to get the top coaching talent to come on board, in part because of his age. And he was always dealing with the question, how long are you going to be around? How long are you going to be coaching for? All those different things. The second part of it was that so many of his guys who he kind of helped raise up as assistants had gone on to be head coaches elsewhere, had success, and were hiring away different people. So he didn't necessarily have that kind of pool of candidates he would have been able to tap into in the past, because so many of those guys might be at Texas now, or Georgia, or Texas A&M, or all these other prominent programs that wouldn't necessarily just jump to work at Alabama. So all those different factors, plus the fact, as you guys know, wasn't the easiest guy to work for. And so that was always going to naturally turn off certain coaches who just don't want to live that lifestyle on a daily basis.